capacity than anybody, both offensively and defensively. But our goal is not to suddenly, in the cyber arena, duplicate a cycle of escalation that we saw when it comes to other arms races in the past, but rather to start instituting some norms so that everybody's acting responsibly.
Well, following revelations that Russia was involved or is behind a string of cyber intrusions in the U.S., it is no surprise that this handshake between President Putin and President Obama looked a little bit on the steely side. I mean, if looks could kill. But that's only one aspect of a deteriorating relationship between our two countries. And in a larger picture of some problems with the G-20 summit. We're back with the panel now. There were a lot of indignities in this trip to Asia, one of which when Air Force One pulled up to the airport in the Chinese city, whose name escapes me right now, they didn't have the mobile staircase for the president. I couldn't believe that. He had to open the belly stairwell and come out that way. It might be what college students call a microaggression, but a telling one nonetheless.
It is a macroaggression. The Chinese are the most adept people at diplomacy and ritual and protocol of any on the planet. They've been doing it for 3,000 years. And to explain this as an accident is ridiculous. It shows their utter contempt for the United States and for this president. And when you heard what he said about cyber wars, you really want to weep. He's been in office for 8 years, and he essentially says, well, look, we have the advantage in cyber technology, but we don't want to press it in any way. We want the other guys to live by these norms. The idea that Russia and China live by norms, that somehow Obama is going to educate them into these norms, where Russia is helping to commit genocide in Syria, and you expect that it's going to acquire etiquette on cyber? It is simply, it's astonishing that we could have a president who believes this, and it explains why, after 8 years, the great powers of the world, starting with China and Russia, know that they are dealing with an adversary, the United States, its president, who is simply one who does not earn any of their respect.
And Chuck, there was another indignity, pretty gross, really, on the scale of international diplomacy, when the president of the Philippines called President Obama, and I know this is inappropriate dinner time conversation, called him the son of a whore for failing, or for threatening, I should say, to intervene in their human rights record, to observe some frailties in that.
That is a puzzling one. This new president of the Philippines, to cut a long story short, has an extraordinary policy of essentially extrajudicial killings of suspected drug dealers in this country. And I don't think the United States can sit by and allow a longstanding ally who we fund to just conduct itself that way. On the other hand, we do need the Philippines, and we do have an alliance with them. And this guy decided to just push back against our president on that basis. I would say that what struck me about that, though, is that there are a lot of other dictators in Asia that the president is willing to kind of do business with. They're a little less flamboyant than this elected authoritarian in the Philippines, but, you know, Xi Jinping of China, he visited Laos, which is not a free country. He's been to Vietnam and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, I think that's part of the sort of big dilemma of U.S. policy in Asia, is that a lot of our friends are not particularly exemplary Democrats either. And that case with this guy from the Philippines just exemplified that.
Tucker, the other indignity, North Korea launching 3 mid-range missiles, which
Yes.
landed 600 miles away from the G-20 summit.
That's true. Let me just say something about the Philippines. I mean, the Philippines over the last 70 years has been one of the most consistent U.S. allies. Surveys of foreign populations show they like us almost more than anybody else, the polls. But since we liberated Manila in 1945, the Obama administration hassling them over their policy toward drug dealers. The Saudis, one of our closest allies, behead people for adultery and having a martini. And we don't say anything. I mean, so let's put some perspective here. This is part of a longer-term reflex of this president to stick it in the eye of our friends and kowtow to our enemies. There's no reason, especially since what's really at stake here is alignment. I mean, the Philippines could actually align to some extent with China. You don't want that. That would be a total disaster, a generational disaster over Executing drug dealers,
Yeah,
really?
well, I think it is a little bit bigger deal than that. He's basically unleashed thugs.
He's a bad guy.
He's written a blank check
Lots
to
of bad
people who
guys.
got to murder anybody
Okay,
they
yeah,
claim
no,
to
it's
be a
bad.
drug
Lots of bad things happen. But the question is,
actually
what's in
worse than
our
what they
interest?
do
It's a
with
terrible
cyber.
thing. I'm appalled. But what's in our interest? That's the question.
Yeah, well, I think that's it's a harder question than you're making it seem.
Teetotaling adultery. I think that's the way to
It raises the question, though, in advance of the presidential election, whether we can expect more aggressive maneuvers by our adversaries in the coming months, the waning months of the Obama
I
administration.
think these waning months are dangerous months. It isn't often that you're a Putin or you're Chinese leadership and you draw an adversary as weak as Obama, who obviously does not want to stir the pot anywhere. He doesn't want to lift a finger in Syria, in Iraq, elsewhere, and he's sort of struggling to hold the Europeans just onto the minimal sanctions for Ukraine. If you are the Chinese, and you've seen how Obama has flinched time after time as with the land grab, the illegal creation of islands and airfields by the Chinese in the South China Sea, why wouldn't you push ahead with it right now? Here's your golden opportunity.
That's it for the panel tonight, but stay tuned for